Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TPO Media. Yes, it is me again, little Brady Whetham. I don't know if you've been sick of my face yet, but I know somebody who hasn't been sick of my face yet, which is surprising because I encourage you to go check out the last episode called What is Man? With our resident psychotherapist, Sim, the simulator Chhabra. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me again.
And we left this on a note of basically saying that all four categories of man that you laid out, we're technically all four of those categories. We can kind of pull from different categories, but realistically, we share all traits. And what are those four traits?
So you have alpha,
Yep.
and you have beta, omega, and then sigma. So to kind of recap for the audience, alpha is what, is predominantly revered in society, and that's your most dominant, the leader, the guy that's in the forefront. Beta is more like a supporting actor to give you better reference. They follow the alpha, they kind of keep the suit, they keep the herd in check. And then you have the omega. They tend to be the outliers in terms of observers. They're the ones kind of sitting on the fence, they get kind of herded in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your sigmas, which are considered like your lone wolves, right? So those are your four main characteristics.
And I feel like I share traits to all four of those things in different ways.
We all do, because we take on those roles in different ways, right? So you could be an alpha, say, for example, your job position requires you to lead a team, right? So now you have to embody alpha traits, because how else are you going to keep them? Like a CEO is a very good example of an alpha, right? A beta would be a parent, right? Because when you are co-parenting, you kind of like sometimes take the lead. So, we were talking about women nurture, right? Well, then you're going to have to take a beta role in that lens, because you're going to be a supporting person in that. Your omegas, we're more often omegas than not. And that's when you're looking at like societal structures, right? So that CEO alpha is still an omega, because he has to go to work. He has
Still got to put on the suit and tie. Still got to do the routine.
And he's bound by the stakeholders and the shareholders and the board of directors versus the employee who's bound by him. So in the bigger picture, he becomes the omega. And sigma is just his personal drive. Maybe he's looking for creating his own mark, right? So you that's where you kind of weave through all four at any given time, and you're not specifically bound. And that's something that when I work with men, and I work with men with identity, once you typecast yourself into one corner and you go, no, I'm only that, that's where you create the imbalance, because now you're trying to take a characteristic in all four lanes when it wouldn't work. So to give you an example, you can't take an alpha and a beta role, because then if you're talking to your boss at that level, well, now you're being insubordinate. Or say if you're in the army, that's a very good example of alpha, beta, omegas,
Yeah.
mostly alpha and betas. So if your superior gives you a command, you can't be an alpha there.
You can be I guess the only way that you could really be an alpha in that situation is once you're actually doing the mission. You can put yourself in an alpha position, right?
Well, the alpha comes more in when the public sees you, because you've taken on the sense of a service and servitude, right? So in a societal lens, because society is not going to distinguish the serviceman till you start looking at titles. The fact that you serve, now you're an alpha, say in your group. You may be a private, but in your group, you're an alpha because you're doing something far more, right? But within your unit, you're a beta.
Well, we keep saying the word alpha, and we had left it where we were going to break down all four of those categories. So because we keep saying alpha, and it seems to be fun, and you brought me a nice book called The Art of Manliness, which I'm going to read when we're done here. Alpha. Let's break down alpha just in itself, and we'll try and stay into that category. So as far as I know, an alpha male is not only the things that you explained, but alpha males seem to be what leads the narcissistic and arrogance movement, where it takes confidence and turns it into something completely different. So when you're saying something like, when you're saying things like, if you're just going to hone the alpha mentality, that can get out of control, right? I've seen it happen in my own life. I was probably a little bit busier as a kid than most kids at the time. And that led to like a delusional kind of confidence, which eventually by my teens had led to an arrogance. By 19, 20, I was completely narcissistic and self-aware enough of what was going on that I was starting to feel guilt. So it was like one day I would wake up, I'd be in the mentality of being super narcissist. The next day I would wake up and feel guilty for the way that I lived that day previously. So that's an example of me being not only young and trying to figure myself out, but being stuck in that alpha mentality, and it got out of control. Am I correct with saying or thinking that alpha male is what drives the narcissism?
Yes. And you brought up a very good point, and I kind of want to expand that a bit. Sorry. So
Third time's always the best, Sim.
3 times a charm, man. That's what they say. When you look at puberty, right? Because you brought up 19. Men or boys or anybody in that gender.
I'm still a boy. Don't get yourself confused.
Right. I'm going on 3 mentally. So that's when definition of masculinity starts coming to fruition, right? Because you go back in time as well. That's considered coming of age, right? When we were talking about, the nomadic caveman days, right? And you look at it like through the natives lens and stuff, it's a separation from childhood to manhood, right? So this is where, some cultures would have where they would send you out into the forest and you had to scavenge your way back, or you spent a week on a spiritual journey, right? That was your awakening part of it. So it's very common to have spikes and valleys, right? So, you might be having, because your body's also developing testosterone, you're developing sperm, and you're going through a physical change. So that's very common. By the time you reach 19, 20, if you don't have good parameters to help you shape, whether it's through support at home or environment, and Andrew Tate's a very good example of that, because when you look at his teen years, he had to fend for himself because they moved to England. So he didn't have his own dad helping him shape his thoughts. Okay. Yeah. And then we were talking about Tom Brady. And if you look at Tom Brady in the same age, he had that insular support. So even though they both are extreme alphas, they both have narcissistic tendencies, the desire to always be on top, always win. With Tom Brady, it's, how many rings can I get on my finger?
You ever seen the way he looks into a camera? He's a narcissist.
That's what I mean. But they exhibit different traits, right? So anything on an extreme is going to create that reality. And with alphas, it's a very thin line that it's hard for them to control because it's a self-feeding mechanism. Then it turns into this addiction of being superior. It's not a fault. It's not a deficiency. It's just they didn't learn regulation early on, so they don't know where their stopgap is. So as they get older in life, it's harder for them to stop because that's the only mechanism they know.
As far as I know, you're not a scientist, but you're an expert in the chemicals that run around in our brain, right? I guess is the easiest.
Some awareness.
Do you get a dopamine drip when you act like an asshole?
But they're not identifying it as that because they're doing a biological reaction, right? It's a feel-good mechanism. It's like when you are binge eating cookies, right? You're not contemplating how much insulin your body's releasing. You're more on like, this feels good, and you're repeating behavior. So they're two different detachments, right? A biologist would look at it, or a dietitian would look at it and go, oh, you're pumping out a lot of insulin, but you don't have that awareness because you're more connected with the sensation and the feel in the mouth. Same thing with the sense of control, because it's a psychological, right? So if you take either one and you put them on the field, right? So if you put Brady and he's got 2 minutes on the clock, first down, 20-yard line, you catch him there, he's going to exhibit the same animalistic traits that a narcissist would exhibit in a normal function, because it's how he's interpreting his environment. So what he's pulling in from psychology. Am I making sense there?
Yeah, and it's funny because the more complex that this is laid out, the more it just leads back to a primal brain. So like we could fill this whole table
Yeah.
with the actual science behind why that happens.
Yeah.
But it all leads back to one simple thing: primal brain.
We are biology, right? It's we over time have more inputs. So we have more ways of understanding it. But functionally, we haven't evolved past basic functions, right? Flight or fright, right? So if you don't use Tom Brady and you go back into a primitive brain and you're a hunter and a tiger's coming at you, you're going to have the same instincts, right? To make sure it doesn't attack, whatever. And if you have to protect somebody, that dopamine is going to accelerate, right? So it's no different. We've just changed the environment. The biology stays the same. We haven't become a different species. We've just mutated within.
Well, when we actually do become a different species, or we evolve and that reptilian or primal portion of our brain cease to exist, I think that's when we stop throwing bombs at each other.
Yeah.
Right? Because that seems primal too, right?
Yeah.
Because the war that's going on, and I don't want to completely
Yeah.
hijack the whole show, but that seems like this is an ego war at this point, right? Obviously, there was a regime change or whatever the reasons were that they were thrown, but now it's continuing as it's going, 2 weeks in. Seems like this is an ego thing.
Right. I mean, again, it's like, not to bring politics into it and just keeping it from a psychology lens, I consider them like, they're more on the assertive side of alpha. So if you look at it through like a linear line, right? And you go, okay, alpha is a spectrum. So you have passive alphas and you have assertive alphas. Okay. And then what we're talking about is, the ones that are like borderline assertive to where they have like a control, and not to name names, but there's like a whole category of them that tend to exhibit excessive assertive alpha components versus center or passive. So that's where you start seeing it becoming an identity. And, like one of the things they talk about is toxic masculinity.
Yeah. Which I don't believe in that.
It's not an appropriate word.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything toxic about being masculine.
It's irregulated.
Yeah. Irregulated is a better
Right.
Irregulated masculinity sounds like a way better word than toxic. Like toxic at this point. Come on, guys.
Because now you're labeling, and all of a sudden, how do you decipher what is toxic? Because toxic is poison. So are you saying poison masculinity or irregulated masculinity?
This is what I'm saying. It's almost an alpha, like
it's a poor word that got attached. It's an easy word because irregulated, then okay, what's irregulated?
It's oxymoron, right?
Ish. So, here's a very good example of how you can understand what passive masculinity and assertive masculinity is, right?
Yeah, okay.
So let's take pop culture and let's use, let's use Matt Damon. Okay. So a passive.
You just always have like these pop culture guys or examples that are they just make me giggle. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying you just make me giggle with the references you use.
It helps, to conceptualize what I'm trying to get at, right? So you take Matt Damon. Right. Yeah. So you have Good Will Hunting.
Now, is it Matt Damon, the real Matt Damon, the actor Matt Damon, or the Matt Damon from Team America? The Matt Damon. Like, is it what Matt Damon are you talking about?
The person as a character.
Okay. All right.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about alpha masculinity, right? So whether it's fact or fiction, we still interpret what we see. So to not make it like too technical, let's just assume we're seeing this, right? And you're seeing a characteristic like Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon, okay? And there are many people that exhibit that kind of characteristics, right? So I would categorize them as passive alphas, right? They are in charge, but they tend to be a little bit more subdued about it. Okay?
Wait, are you painting a picture here?
Right.
I feel like you're painting a picture.
Right. And then on the other side, don't give it away.
Sim Bob Ross over here. Let's do this.
And then on the other side, when you look at an assertive alpha, Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that are Jason Bournes, right? They'll find a way. They're resolute. They're quick on their feet. They're quick to think.
They MacGyver their way through life. Yep.
But these are the ones that we have admiration and yearning for. These are the ones where we're like, no, I don't want to be that, even though they both are very prominent alpha characters, right? I'll give you another one, right? You take Tom Cruise, right? No, just to show you how they both work, right?
Let's use a different example. Well, okay, no, Tom, you got it laid out.
Right. So you have
I still
Jerry,
really like that guy.
right? What I'm trying to get is passive and assertive, right? You have Jerry Maguire, and then you have
Show me the money.
and then you have Ethan Hunt.
Who's Ethan Hunt? Is that the Mission Impossible?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you complete me and Ethan Hunt.
Hanging off the side of a cliff somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying
They're
is,
both alpha males in their own right,
but this is more revered.
I like this example, even though I don't like Tom Cruise. That was a great example because Jerry Maguire was a man's man, but he probably couldn't use a screwdriver, right? He couldn't be hanging off the side of a mountain.
But he like, you complete me.
Yeah.
Right? Teary-eyed, like.
He's a real man.
Right, but it's sport.
It's
like,
a different
he's an agent.
Yeah.
He's an agent showing emotional connection. Like realizing, like, it's a relationship that matters. Versus Ethan Hunt. Completely different. But they both are alpha lenses.
So what category should we be living in as men in Canada just trying to get through the day, right? Like,
what we need to understand, one, we have our own individual personalities. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with clients, what I tell them is, are you center right or are you center left?
and what do you mean, belief system or
Just how
into that
you-
alpha system?
In that alpha system,
Okay.
are you center right or center left?
Yeah.
Do you tend to be a little bit more, anybody that plays contact sports tends to be center right. It's a natural tendency. That doesn't mean it's a character flaw. That's why the toxic word is an inappropriate word, because it's not a character flaw.
Irregular is
You're
a way
either
better
center
word.
right or you're center left, right? You're more reflective. You're more environmentally observant, right? So you are more center left. Generals tend to be more center left. Why? Because they have to make sure that when they send soldiers into the field, they bring them home alive. That's center left alpha. Versus, I'm okay with how many casualties, the current defense secretary, right? Like, that's a center right. It's the cost of the cause.
So let's say somebody was living, and anybody watching it, if they're living on the extremes of either side of that, right? What would you do to get them back centered?
So,
Like, what should they tell themselves and work on themselves, or what message would you give to them if they seem like they're too far off on either side of that spectrum and you want to try and ground them?
right. So,
Just in the alpha stance.
right. So and this is where a majority of people struggle with, because they feel any shift is a loss of identity. Shift is not a loss of identity. It's you look at the cost of not maintenance. Okay. So Andrew Tate's a very good example of that, right? He has to continuously now maintain that image. He has to put a lot of energy to come across as being alpha strong.
Well, that's where it became a meme, right? So it got to the point where he had to fight.
But
after
from an
talking about it for so
individual
long.
lens,
Yeah.
right? From an individual lens, it's like you can only do so much until it doesn't become beneficial to you, right? So they know, an individual knows when they're extreme and it's become their identity. So that's where conversations with support, works. So he had a podcast out right when he came out of Romania with a therapist, and it got like some 9 million views or something.
It got a lot of steam.
Yeah, and I watched it, right? And I sent it to you and I commented on it. I go, look, that's his style, right? Because he sees it as coming into a cage. So he has to get the first hit in, and then he has to keep punching, because the more he punches, the more control he has.
I feel like that was a kind of our first episode of this.
Right,
I came in, swinging.
right. But, right, you're an assertive style, I have a passive style, but we're still kind of like doing the dance, right? So we're not competing for the same space.
Yeah.
So an individual needs to understand.
If we were, you would win.
Well, no, you would win. You're tiny, you'd get around.
Easily maneuverable.
Yeah, right? So for an individual that kind of goes, okay, what does center right look like to me? What does center left look like to me, right? If you're on the edges, it just never benefit anybody. It doesn't, because you got to have to then continually maintain a persona that is not relevant. But if you can go, hey, look, I know when I need to gear up and I know when I need to gear down, right? It allows you to be more functional. You can still stay alpha. So Tom Brady, when he's off the field and he's going into the locker room and acting like the same way it's the fourth quarter, at the 20-yard line with a game on the line, he cannot take that same assertive aggressiveness that he has on the field home.
No. Well, maybe he did, and that's why he's in the scenario he's in.
Well, he wanted the 9th ring, right? Or maybe she just got tired of those vegan juices. Whichever came first. Yeah.
She just really likes jiu-jitsu is what she likes.
Well, coming of age, right? What I'm trying to get at is, so if he continuously stays, well, there's the consequence of that. Same thing with Andrew Tate, right?
Yeah.
You can't, because I hear some of his stuff and I'm like, you can't maintain this. So who are you going after? You're going after the ones that are looking for somebody that is aggressive, because their chances are they're going through that puberty stage with not having resources and they have to learn to fend for themselves. So they're going to look to the biggest alpha male, whether it makes sense or not.
Let's just hope they're not completely mirroring that mentality, right? Because taking things from it that resonate with you to make you better at what you do daily, I get that. But to take somebody's word, like an Andrew Tate, who's so on the extreme, you can get into a lot of trouble. He got himself into trouble, right? Numerous times from trying to keep that persona up and live in that alpha male state. He's gotten himself into shit numerous times.
Because you gotta feed it.
Yeah.
You gotta feed the monster, right? So, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, that it's not working. One of the best ways to kind of like frame that is, say you're hungry, right? And
I am.
So you eat one hamburger, right? It makes you feel good. Then you eat 2 hamburgers. It makes you feel full, but it's not as satisfying as the first burger was. You eat your 3rd burger. Now it's completely less satisfying the second one.
Well, now you have acid reflux.
Those are secondary consequences. What I'm saying is the pleasure you got out of the first burger versus your 3rd burger is much less. Same thing here. It's not a thing that you can't measure, because then you start realizing that at some point, maybe I need to back off.
Maybe this is an ass backwards question. I don't think maybe there's not even an answer for this, or maybe it's just so absurd that you don't even answer it or give it the time of day. But when is narcissism actually useful? Is that never useful? And you should, because I don't know. I feel like there's 3 stages to this, and there's confidence, being confident in yourself and having confidence, which can slowly turn into arrogance.
Right.
And that arrogance can get out of control and slowly turn into narcissism.
Right.
Whether that's rapid or fast, those seems to be the 3 stages, right?
Right.
Delusional confidence leads to arrogance. Delusional arrogance leads to narcissism.
Right.
When is that final stage
beneficial,
if at all? Is there any benefits to being a narcissist?
So
I don't mean narcissism like you only love yourself, everybody. Like, I don't mean the Luciferian definition of narcissism. I mean like actual narcissism, where you're still empathetic, but it seems to be that your arrogance is just out of control.
So it's a very good point. We take the characteristics, take the word out. Okay.
Okay.
So if you look at the characteristics, right, the elements of nobody else exists, I exist. Okay. Where would that be the most relevant? Where you got a gun pointing at you. Because that characteristics then become, I need to do what I need to do to survive. Okay. Where narcissism becomes an issue is when I'm causing harm, whether I'm aware of it or not, but I'm causing harm to other beings.
I can't see narcissism not causing harm to somebody. Like,
no, what I'm saying is
it would have to, right?
If we separate the characteristics and you ask, when does narcissism have validity, right? I'm saying if you take the word out.
Okay. Yeah.
If you take the word out and you're in a position of threat of life, right? Whether it's yourself or anybody else, those characteristics are now revered. You put the word back in.
Now it's dirty again.
Now because you're doing it and it's going to cause harm to somebody. That's when narcissism doesn't have a place.
So maybe, like I said, maybe that there is no real answer to that, because that sounds like you're now, if you're going to take that word out, you're just falling back into confidence again.
Right. But it's the word, like toxic masculinity. Minute we attach word to a certain thing, and
because categorizing them and you're screwing
then
yourself.
We add it to our brain and then we question ourselves.
This is why labels are shit. And I'm sorry if you got to keep bleeping this. You probably won't with the shit, but we'll say it again just the third time's a charm. Shit.
Yeah.
But why? This is another example of why labels, in every sense of the form, are a problem. And this is why I think guys like me, maybe from your perspective, because I've heard a lot of psychotherapists and a lot of therapists say, we know you don't like me, or we know we don't like what I do. And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's because it almost, in my brain, if I sit down with a psychotherapist, counselor, whoever, psychologist, it's just going to label me. I'm going to fit inside of like 30, categories, and they're going to keep boom, 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 boom until they figure out what pill to give me. Right? So these labels lead to problems. And I've always thought that labels lead to problems. And what you're saying about words is we're kind of labeling these things, and they're getting a life of their own, when if you didn't put a label on them, you just kept that mentality, might not be dangerous. It might not be somebody else is getting hurt.
Or understand the word that you're using.
Understand it properly.
Right. Yeah. That's why, we said irregulated versus
Are you just
toxic.
telling me I don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? No, but I get it. No, you're right.
20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, that's it. No more 3 episodes. But yeah, I guess you're right. It's just trying to make sense out of these things, right? So if the word like toxic, narcissism, things like that are not used in the actual real way they should be used.
So say we, let's role play for a second. You've expressed everything that you've expressed to me about how you see the world. Okay. And I come to return back and I go, hey, that's toxic masculinity, right? You're going to take a stance to that because you're like,
we want to fight?
Right. You're going to get offended. And
you watch your mouth, Bucky.
I'm not toxic, You don't understand my life. I had to go through this. You know what it was like, right? So what it's done is now we're going to get contentious, right? But if I kind of listen to you and I go, it sounds that there's irregulated emotion control, or, you're having difficulty knowing when to switch it off. Same story. Difficulty switching it off. You have more relatability because you're like, that is where my issue is.
I'd still say, let's go back. What do you mean I got a problem switching it off? Let me switch it on and show you what I'm all about. No.
Right.
No, yeah, I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's where my profession misses the mark. Right. And I'm not saying, there are not credible people out there that have been in this field for a very long time and they know what they're doing. You need words to reference, but there are internal words and then there are words that we talk in the general public. You use internal words in the general public, like narcissism, right? Yes, there's a clinical definition to it. Yes, it's a psychological understanding of when the other individual has no care or regard for anyone in their environment.
It's a social media meme word too, right? It's a buzzword. I've seen it for 10 years now on social media. Any woman or a man that gets into a problem with their significant other, they're like, I was dating a narcissist.
Or an emotional avoidant or a detached. And understand it, understand what it's referencing, and then say, okay, does that person exhibit that? Because we all have it. We all have. You want narcissism? Go to a big company, okay, and say this department's going to get 30% cut. Every person's going to turn narcissist. Why? Because they got to look out for themselves. Because a narcissist looks out for themselves.
At least the food on your plate.
Self-preservation. And depending on the path you took to get that job, your desire to save your job is that much exponentially great. What are you going to do? You're going to exhibit every characteristic a narcissist would do. Why? Because narcissism is self-preservation.
But it's going to lead to that.
No, what I'm saying is because the circumstance is a department comes in, 30% of your department's going to go, and you're a department of, say, 10 people, right? All 10 are going to go for self-preservation because they don't want to be in that 30%. That means each one of you are narcissists. That's my point.
Well, this is why you can't get unions inside of fighting or WWE or pro wrestling, is because everybody is an individual. The second you put their back against the wall and you start threatening jobs.
What I'm trying to get at is that we all exhibit the characteristic when the environment
I get it.
calls for it. So don't go labeling people, because you equally have those components until it's relevant to you. Take a competitive parent that's going on the pitch and calling the ref for not calling a play. Isn't that narcissism? Or making sure that your kid gets an extra 2 minutes on the mound? That's narcissism.
It's got traits of it, yes.
But you're not defining it because you are saying, oh, no, I'm doing it for so. No, it's the same because we're looking at characteristics. That's what I'm saying. Words matter.
So what would we do if we find ourselves subconsciously making these decisions and they seem to lead to the negative, right? Like some of them will lead to the negative. The mother getting up there and screaming at the coach may get your kid not played next season, or you know what I mean, the next
Right.
game or next season, right? Like these things can lead to issues.
What I'm saying is, but then now we're getting lost in the details, right? Like
Yeah,
just-
well, I love that. That's why
Right.
I would wish we could do 3-hour podcasts.
Right. And it's a fair statement, but what I'm saying is, it's more for the audience, right? Because now, if they get kind of lost in the trail end of it, the big picture is that words matter. We misuse words all the time. When it comes to the alpha lens, you have either, and it belongs to all genders, because this is a characteristic trait. This is not an identity trait.
It's a primal trait.
It's
They're primal.
We see it in nature all the time. We see it with moms. If she feels that her kids or her family are going to be threatened, she's going to turn alpha in a nanosecond.
Well, there's been reports for years of ladies lifting the car off of their child, right? So you hear about that. If a mother's kid is trapped under the car, she'll pick that thing up
She'll
and
do
throw it
whatever it
across the
takes.
horizon. Yeah.
Well, so those are characteristics. Don't get caught on the words, and understand that it's malleable, and understand that it's energy that you can manage. And all you need to understand is it assertive? Is it passive? When's it necessary? When's it not necessary? Right? Tom Hanks is another good one, right? Saving Private Ryan, assertive. Right?
I know you're going to say Forrest Gump.
I was going to say Forrest Gump, passive. Right? Clint Eastwood. You want Clint Eastwood?
Okay, let's talk about Big Clint. Yeah.
Yeah. $1 Million Baby?
Gran Torino.
Right. See that? You just, dirty.
I've got it.
Right. And that's what people need to understand. Use the information to reference yourself. Don't corner yourself. Because the minute you corner yourself, you only corner yourself because it depends on how the world looks and how you can translate the world.
The more we do these, the more I realize too, I'm going to have to get you in for a conversation just about movies and movie characters, because you are a movie character reference machine, Sim.
I love, because
they're good examples, right?
I use it in session because it allows people to then frame their minds, right? Because we personify idols and people in our environment, and movies is one place where we go and we kind of try to emulate that character, and that's what gives actors and actresses this sense of respect, because they can take on a character that is not them, but presented in a way where you're like, that is them.
And maybe I'm confused, but I think through this past 45 minutes, you've just been telling me I'm Jason Bourne, right? So I'm happy with the ending there. I love being Jason Bourne. No, I'm joking. I'm going to read this book, The Art of Manliness. What do you, I know you've read it.
Yeah.
What is the biggest takeaway that you took from this book?
It's got probably the most middle pack advice. Like, it's got on how to tie a tie, right? That's what people want to hear.
That's that old school Jordan Peterson mentality. They 8 simple rules. Simple rules.
Stuff.
Keep yourself structured.
Simple, right?
Man, I wish you didn't fall off that guy.
Right. And
sorry,
life
Jordan,
happens,
but-
right? Like,
Sorry, buddy. You're a mess.
Yeah. The point is that we're more center right and center left, and we kind of fluctuate between those two. It's finding am I more center left? Tend to be. What do I need to do to be a little bit more center right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go and find those tools. So it could be where CBT is a very good way, because in CBT you do cognitive reframing, right? So if you are, say, Good Will Hunting, watch that movie, go watch Jason Bourne, right? And go, okay, same character, individual, Matt Damon, he didn't change. Go, hey, he had to learn this character because he's not that character, and he presented it in a certain way. He had to learn this character. So he went into the world, learned those tools, right? He had to learn how to fight. He had to build endurance, which means he had to change his diet, he had to change sleeping, Focus on that, because those things you can control. You can control your diet, because he didn't become from Good Will Hunting to that just by doing, nothing, reading books or listening podcasts. He dedicated himself to become that character.
You know, a very charming man out back of a bar one day, his name was Russell, and he was wearing a pair of Daisy Dukes. And he told me that if you live in the life of narcissism with empathy, eventually it just leads to clinical depression. And it sounded crazy at the time. But the older I get and the more I think about Russell and his Daisy Dukes, I think he may have been onto something, Sim.
Maybe.
Yeah. And more of this conversation makes me realize that I know nothing about being a man. So we're going to have to book another one. And maybe next time we talk about Omega.
Yeah, we could do that.
That would be a nice lead out of alpha male. So hopefully if anybody's watching, you've learned something about not only being a man again and masculinity, and it's not toxic despite what people say.
It's
but maybe
irregulated.
It's irregulated, and you've learned a little bit about what it means to be alpha. So next time we see you, we'll be talking Omega. Sim, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. Like I said, I don't even know how you have the time to come in here and talk to a fool like me when you have such a brilliant brain and you should be booked all the time.
I am. Things I do for a Klondike bar.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.